everyone, and welcome to this week's story time. Now today's story is all about a young girl called Esther. Esther was very beautiful, and she lived in a country called Persia with her cousin Mordecai. You see, Esther didn't have any parents anymore, and so Mordecai looked after her. Now Mordecai and Esther were God's people. They loved God. There was also a king who lived in Persia, and one day he made a really important announcement. "I have decided," he said, "to choose a new queen, and so I command the most beautiful women from throughout my kingdom to come to the palace so I may choose one." Now the king was very rich and very powerful and very spoiled. He always got his own way. And so all the most beautiful women from throughout the kingdom came to the palace, including Esther. And when the king saw how beautiful Esther was, he chose her as his new queen and gave her a beautiful crown. Well, there's a baddie in this story as well, and his name was Haman. Haman was the king's most important advisor. Haman loved Haman, and Haman hated God's people. One day the king made another order. He ordered that everyone who came into the presence of Haman, his most important advisor, should bow down. Haman was delighted when the king made this order. But there was one man who every time he walked past Haman didn't bow down. It was Mordecai. You see, Mordecai loved God, and so God was the only one he would ever bow down to, and he was never able to bow down to Haman. This made Haman so mad, in fact, that the next time he was in the presence of the king, he said to him, "Your Majesty, God's people are very bad, and I think that you should make a new law that helps me to get rid of them." Oh no, what a terrible thing! But the king trusted his top advisor, and so he made the new law straight away. It was a terrible day for God's people, and when Mordecai heard what had happened, he was very worried. But then he had an idea. "I know," he said, "I will go to Queen Esther and ask her to help us." So he went to the palace to see the queen. "Oh, Esther," he said, "have you heard about this terrible new law that Haman has had made? Please help us and go to the king so that we can be saved." The queen said, "Oh, Mordecai, this is so much more difficult than you think. Nobody knows I'm one of God's people. Maybe if I keep quiet, I will be safe." Mordecai said to the Queen Esther, "Oh, Esther, maybe God made you queen so that you could help us at this terrible time." The queen thought some more. "Oh, Mordecai," she said, "it's so much more difficult than you think. Nobody can go into the presence of the king unless they're invited. And if you go in and he doesn't point his golden scepter at you, it can be very dangerous." Esther thought for a moment, And then she said to Mordecai, "Mordecai, go and tell all of God's people to ask God for his help." Mordecai went away to do that. The next day, when the king was sitting on his throne, holding his golden scepter as usual, suddenly Queen Esther came into the room uninvited. The king was delighted to see her, and he pointed his golden scepter straight to her. "What can I do for you, my queen?" he said. "Oh, king," she said, "I would like to invite you and your most trusted advisor Haman for the most special dinner you have ever had." The king was delighted. He summoned his advisor Haman. "Haman," he said, "we've been invited to the queen's palace for dinner." Haman thought that was amazing. And so that evening, he and the king went to the palace for dinner with the queen. "How can I help you?" said the king. But the queen said something that shocked Haman and the king. "Oh, king," she said, "I would like you to save me from Haman." "You see," she said, "I am one of God's people, and Haman wants to get rid of us." The king and Haman were shocked. "Arrest that man," ordered the king, and Haman was taken away. The king was left with no special advisor, and so he chose Mordecai to be his next advisor. The king made a new law protecting God's people from any harm. You see, God had made Esther queen just so she would be close enough to the king to save God's people when they needed it. I hope you enjoyed my story about the king and queen of Persia and how God had used Queen Esther to save his people. I thought you could make your own puppets of the story. I have the wicked Haman and the king of Persia and his beautiful queen Esther, and I've also got Mordecai, her cousin. And perhaps you could make a set of these puppets and act out the story for yourselves. I hope you have fun, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.